Hello, everyone. We are so happy to be here. We are on this live from Autumn to you guys. It's called the Autumn Talk by Autumn HQ. It's the space race runs to Texas. This is an article that I actually came across a couple of months ago, and that was written by these three amazing guys that are here on the screen. And I just want to say thank you so much for accepting this invitation, Brent, Chris, and Kevin. Thank you so much for writing the article. It was super helpful, and I learned so much about the Texas startups that are actually interested in exploring space and that are moving into our state. So this is super exciting to learn. And I'm gonna actually dive in directly to the conversation because I want to make the best and make the best of the time that we are going to have here together. And I'm going to ask the first question that is actually coming from me. And as you guys respond to this question, please introduce yourselves so that all the people who's going to be joining can actually learn about you guys and what you guys do. My question is super easy. I am very curious to learn how this article came to be. Like, what is the process behind the process of writing it? Was it like something that you guys came up with? Was this like a trend that you were like seeing in the state and you guys decided to get together? Because I do know that you guys are in different cities. Or was it an assignment? So let's start with you, Brent. I mean, you're on the other side.
Yeah,
Please introduce yourself as you respond to this question.
absolutely. My name is Brent Wistrom, and I'm a senior editor with American Inno, and I run the Austin Inno beat. So if you get the newsletter, I'm the one who writes that, and then I write articles for the Austin Inno website and the Austin Business Journal website. And this article, it really came out of just seeing the trend emerge in Texas. No question, the imminent liftoff of Blue Horizon and of SpaceX kind of propelled us to be thinking about this. You know, having SpaceX just down the street, so to speak, in Texas terms, in Brownsville, and we thought this was a great opportunity to connect again. So if you don't know much about Inno, Austin Inno's been around since like 2015, and we launched NTX Inno up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area like 2 years ago. Kevin, you can correct me there. And then Houston Inno maybe 6-8 months ago, something like that. So this was our first opportunity to work together, and we all immediately saw that there's a lot of activity in these three markets, and not just in Austin, Houston, and Dallas, throughout the state. But we thought this is a good opportunity to work together and kind of look at something as the state, and not just one city or one market. So in a large part, it was a first exercise for us to work together like this, but there was so much groundswell going on with SpaceX and its operations down south and here in Austin, in addition to the rich history in Houston and the growing community in Dallas. It's just kind of turned into a no-brainer for us. And I think these guys can tell you more about it, but it came together fairly quickly for us. I don't think we had to dig too deep to find some pretty exciting companies.
Right.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to add Kevin Cummings. I'm a staff writer for NTX Inno, and I write articles for the Dallas Business Journal as well. I mean, like Brent was saying, obviously there's a lot of activity, and beyond that, we're reporters, we're curious, and space is a cool topic. So I mean, I'd written about a few things before, and we had talked about kind of doing a statewide collaboration as well, and I think this was a great entrance into that.
That's awesome.
And Chris Matthews here. I am coming to you from San Antonio, but I report for the Houston Business Journal covering finance and technology primarily. And I also run the Houston Inno newsletter and website as well, which we launched in April of this year. So not too long, but have experienced all things Inno and just learned a lot about the technology community, not only in Houston, but across the state. And I guess I would add to that, it's one of the biggest benefits of our company, I would say, our parent company, American City Business Journal, is just being able to lean on other reporters in different markets that have expertise and have sourcing and know the stories there. And so to be able to collaborate with Kevin and Brent when we came together to kind of come up with a Texas-wide feature, I mean, this is what we do across the board. So it was kind of a no-brainer. It made a lot of sense just with regards to the growth of the industry we've seen across the Lone Star State. So the ability for reporters in different markets that have kind of regional expertise to band together to kind of collectively write an article, that's I would say one of the pluses of our American City Business Journals network.
That's amazing. How long did it take for you guys to complete this whole, like the interviews and the whole investigation? Was it like months and months, or just really quick?
I'm trying to remember. I think it was about a month that we took to kind of start doing the interviews and put everything together. I know on my end, I just started by looking up the history of, companies and what they've been doing, since the 60s, working on kind of the space race and stuff like that. And then finding new companies that are developing new technologies. And I think it took about a month to kind of source everything and talk to everyone and write it up.
Good. So was it easy for you guys to just pick up the phone and be like, hey, I want to talk to Mr. Tom Markusik or Steve Altimus, or like, was it super easy?
No, I mean, definitely not. I mean, especially bringing up Tom Markusik with Firefly, they're certainly available to us, but not the easiest people to get a hold of. I mean, the timelines that they run on and the deadlines they have to meet are even stricter than ours. So got great respect for that. But yeah, I mean, I think we're able to get folks on the phone when we need them, but it wasn't easy, at least for me.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, connecting with Steve Altimus at Intuitive Machines. We've connected before. I've written a number of stories about them, so that helps, right? From kind of a journalistic perspective and sourcing, and there's nothing more important to journalism, I would argue, than good sourcing. It's the foundation for it all. So yeah, I mean, like Brent said, like, we can give people a call, they'll pick up the phone, but obviously these are extremely busy people that are literally sending stuff to the moon in some instances. So not even just joking, literally sending things to the moon. So it just takes tenacity. It's not going to happen overnight. You got to plan ahead, right? When you're doing something like this. So giving yourself enough time is a big factor too.
Yeah, yes. I think when I talked to Melanie Strickland from Slingshot Aerospace, she was like on the floor of a aerospace industry event. Like, wow. It's just like it's kind of grabbing the time when you can.
Yeah, I know. And how about you, Kevin? Like, who were you able to interview, and how was the process?
I actually got kind of lucky. One of the companies I had wrote about is Strappy Corporation. I had written about them before. They had gotten accepted into an accelerator program. So I kind of knew them and had a little bit of relationship with them. People at universities that I talk to are usually really excited to talk about their work and stuff like that. So they're usually pretty easy to get on the phone. And then a lot of the other companies that I wrote about here have kind of operated relatively quietly. And so some of them were pretty excited to, kind of have their first, article written about them or stuff like that. But a lot of it too was just kind of leaning on other people and being like, hey, if you work in the space industry, who else do you know? And kind of using those contacts to kind of open the door to other people.
Yeah. And did you guys ever try to contact Elon Musk for SpaceX or Jeff Bezos or any?
I did not reach out to Elon Musk, though. It has been something that's crossed my mind, just given the fact that they have relocated or are relocating. I don't know exactly where that is. Probably takes multiple years. But I mean, they're obviously doing stuff down in Brownsville. They're doing stuff in Central Texas, outside of Austin. They're doing stuff in Austin. They're installing some sort of renewable battery project to sell electricity to retail customers, down in Angleton, which is in the Houston area. So, I mean, Elon, if you're listening, we would love to speak with you, but I don't know if you're on this segment.
I think he did subscribe to this event. I'm not sure if he's already in, but anyway. Guys, I want to ask you my next question. What is it about space that interests you the most? Because one of the things that actually caught a lot my attention about this article is how these startups are so focused on creating the technology around this space exploration rather than landing in the moon or or landing in Mars or things like. I mean, they are interested in those things, but they are very focused on creating technology, right? The artifacts and all these things. So I want to know what interests you guys the most about all this topic.
It's a tough one. I mean, I guess on a personal note, I could get like existential about space and all that, but I think just personally writing about technology and kind of trying to see like what those new emerging trends are going to be, and kind of thinking about all the possibilities of the things that could be built off of what's happening right now. That was like kind of what I came across a lot with the companies here in Dallas, is they're not necessarily, the huge flashy ones that are getting all the news, but they're creating technologies and systems that will be used by other companies to do who knows what. So I think that's kind of interesting, is what's going to come next, and how will that in turn kind of shape the way that we live and interact with each other.
Correct. I agree. How about you, Brent?
I think for me, I mean, it definitely goes back to childhood. We watched, unfortunately, the Challenger launch at school when I was a kid, and I've watched a lot of launches, and I'm interested in the idea of life on other planets or in other solar systems. It kind of leaves this really big space to think about, to use a pun. You can kind of let your imagination run in terms of what's possible in the future. In this story, we wrote about Icon that's, building potentially a way to build structures on Mars out of the materials that are there.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I know, there's a pretty good chance that I won't ever see that really come to fruition in my lifetime, but there's also a chance, and things have certainly moved a lot faster than I think a lot of us have expected. Sometimes if you get in the details, it feels like everything moves so slow. But when I think about from, where I was in my life and thinking about space 25, 30 years ago, compared to what's happening now, it's not the Jetsons yet, but it's pretty close.
I agree. Totally agree. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I would say I agree. Just certainly an interest in space in general, just growing up and wondering about the unknown out there, the final frontier, so to speak. I won't lie and say that I definitely am a major Trekkie and enjoy Star Trek and various technologies that we thought would never come to fruition, have essentially, like remote communications and what do they call those things that you press down, and essentially became cell phones. I mean, because some of these things that we started dreaming about in the 60s with just TV and what space could be have come, actually, and we can hold them physically today. And, beyond that, I would say just the history of the space industry in Texas, in Houston in particular, just with the Johnson Space Center being headquartered there and the Manned Space Flight Center before it was called that, built in the 1960s. It's been an integral part of what made Houston grow in certain areas down the Clear Lake region. So just the historical influence that space and the space economy has had on Texas is, there's few other places in the country that have had such dividends paid to it.
That's true. And you, I don't know if I should say that you're lucky to be living in Houston so that you're close to that, the Lyndon B. Johnson Center, or if you just moved because of that reason. I don't know, but it's really good that you're there, right?
Yeah, so the Johnson Space Center being in Houston was not the reason I moved to Houston, but yes, certainly it is. I won't complain that it is here. It is a big driver of news. It is a big driver of economic development. It is a big driver of money being paid to small businesses and the commercialization of space as NASA grants contracts to private companies to be able to do some of these things that it's ceding control and letting private companies do it possibly for less money. So it really is one of the region's largest assets.
That's very interesting. And before I move on to my next question, Brent, please elaborate a little bit on the you mentioned Icon, and I read about it, so please tell us a little bit more of what that is, just to make sure that people know what we're talking about, because I said that is fascinating, but maybe they really don't know what I'm talking about. So please tell us a little bit.
Yeah, so Icon, they came onto the scene with a splash at South by Southwest a few years ago. And what they've developed is a large industrial scale 3D printer. So if you've seen the 3D printers at the Austin Library or elsewhere that are building like little castles and stuff, they've developed this on a scale to build homes. So they started with building homes. Here in Austin, they've worked with Community First Mobile Fish and Loaves to develop homes for people experiencing homelessness here in Austin. And now they've branched that out into commercial homes, just for regular folks who are, trying to buy a house, I guess. And in the meantime, they've developed all of these other applications, and a lot of them have been aimed at space technologies. So they're contracted building with NASA there in Houston, building a habitat that would be similar to how we might live on Mars. And they will have trainees and volunteers living there for long periods of time to see how folks react and, what things they need to do and not do at the point at which we're ready to try to build one of these things off there on the red planet. They've developed in partnership with a lot of different organizations. They developed a printer to build a launch pad for small rockets that could potentially, I guess, bring satellites to space. And they are also working on that same sort of application for developing structures on the moon. So, and they've gotten a lot of exposure for it. And, I tend to come into these things pretty skeptical. Like, is this a really great idea that could never happen? But, to date, they've really proven themselves to really be able to do it. So they've had some really good exposure on, I think, Good Morning America and several other national broadcasts, not only for the homes, but for the potential structures on the moon and Mars.
Yeah, they're innovating. Like, that is super interesting. When I learned about those or that company, I'm like, this is crazy. Where's the limit, honestly? But anyway, Kevin and Chris, you guys were talking about kind of like the history of space and how that excites you and that actually spikes your interest in this topic. I read your article and I think I know the answer, but I want you guys to tell me, when did all this, the space race started? How did it happen? How did it came to be? Like, I know you guys mentioned something like it all started in 1960 when Texas was actually a hub for space launching or things like that. So I want you guys to tell me in your words, because I am the one who doesn't know. You guys know. So please tell us about when did all this started, please.
Yeah. Chris, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can jump in. Maybe I'll touch on some of the early developments. I believe it was in the late 50s that the Manned Space Flight Center, between the federal government purchasing, I believe, the land from Humble Oil here in the Houston region, NASA began its plans to build a facility in south of Houston, Clear Lake region, before Clear Lake was really a place. It was, I believe, the next year after they started development in the area that the corporation that developed Clear Lake City started developing the area around here for residential homes. So obviously the space race in the United States kind of context started in like the late 50s to 60s. With some of those early missions that gave way, obviously, to like the Apollo missions and the art of, I believe, maybe I'm mischaracterizing some of the timeline here. But so that's kind of the earliest beginnings. Obviously, we were fighting with the Soviets to be able to who was going to get to the moon or get to orbit quicker. So that was kind of the driving force behind a lot of that. I know President JFK had come to Houston to give a speech at Rice University back in the 60s, talking about how the NASA's presence was going to pay dividends to the city of Houston in the future, and certainly was prophetic in his comments there and talking about what was going to be coming down the pipeline. So from kind of the post World War II Cold War era space race was kind of the beginnings of that going on, and we kind of saw that start in Texas around the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a historian on the space race itself or the Cold War, so I couldn't tell you when that kind of started, that whole, funding to try to get to the moon and beat each other to different milestones. But yeah, I mean, like Chris was saying, I assume, kind of late 50s, things started to pick up with the idea of like manned missions to space and stuff. So at least for North Texas, our kind of entrance into it kind of starts in the early 60s. I'm sure there's some work going on with Texas Instruments and stuff like that beforehand, but they really kind of started in the 60s. Some of the founders of that started, I'm going to mess up the name. It was something like the Southwest Research Center. Eventually it turned into UT Dallas, but that's kind of where Texas's entry, or North Texas's entrance is kind of the early 60s, and working on some of those systems that would eventually go into the rockets that would have people go to space.
I actually do have the name. It's called the Research Center, now UT Dallas. So I read the article. So yes, I know about that. And it's super interesting. Yes. So yes, I read that it all started in 1960. That's what I read in the article. And I'm like thinking, and actually created a question about this. How, like when I look at the technology that we are managing or using today to do all these missions, I just cannot understand how were people managing to do the same in the 60s. We had such limited technology, right? Do you guys have, like, how does that happen? Right. I mean, we were testing a lot, and unfortunately there were losses, right? But yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I would say, the phones that we have sitting in our pockets or on our desks are more powerful than the technology they had to send people to the moon in the 1960s. So we have come a long way from there. The computers the size of entire rooms that they were working with. And if you ever, paid a mission to or paid a visit, to the Mission Control Center, the retro one here in Houston at the Johnson Space Center, you can see some of the original. I'm failing on a word to describe mission control centers where the people sat. So yeah, it really is a blast of the past when you think about like the nascent technology that they were using to be able to do all of that. So it's grown significantly since that time.
Oh my God, tell me about it.
I mean, I would have to be speculating how they did it, but I mean, I would say, at least personally, I think it kind of goes back to, all of human history and the desire to just explore. And, if people have that desire, they find a way to make that happen.
Yes, of course. And I'm pretty sure that was necessary to be where we are at right now. We had to go through all those learnings, right? So let me change a little bit the subject or kind of like the tone of the conversation. I want you guys to tell me in your own words, how do you define space tech?
For me, it's pretty broad. I mean, it's, when I think about the companies that are working on things here in Austin, you have a lot of hardware, right? You think about satellites, cube satellites mostly these days. But it's not limited to that. It's communications as well, and figuring out the types of software that are needed to identify things from space. You think about Google Maps as something that we've all pretty much seen. Things go so much higher level, and that requires a whole different level of processing and coding to use computer vision to, for the military, perhaps identify certain buildings or types of vehicles and things like that. Without just having somebody trying to stare at this stuff and figure it out for themselves. So the technology for me, I think of space tech as being very broad, even though, rockets themselves are definitely space tech. To me, that they're a little bit more on the vehicle side. So when I think of space tech, I often think first about sort of the cutting edge technologies, not so much just the rockets going up, but the sophisticated algorithms and computing and coding needed to, you think about SpaceX trying to land their rockets back down. That
materials, right?
Yeah, it's like a lot of precision engine work, but I think about the software that goes into developing something like that. It's not just a remote control like it might have been in the 60s.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would second that. I think it can be broadly defined. I guess if you wanted to put anything on it, just like if the company's focus is on something to do with space, and I think it would kind of fall under that category, because yeah, I mean, you have everything from 3D printers, which I mean people have seen, but they're focusing on an application for a space colony. And one of the companies I wrote about, their focus is on signal modulation, so that you can send data and signals to objects in deep space and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's very broad kind of term, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with that as well. Like in Houston, there are companies developing hardware, like Intuitive Machines, which develops, among various products, it develops a lunar lander that actually deploys and can land on the surface of the moon. Beyond that, there's also software, like Brent was saying, the artificial intelligence and other algorithms that are used to be able to help people pinpoint where on the moon they're going to land, or real-time orbit tracking to be able to know where you are related to other space assets out there. And then, Patty, I think you mentioned materials as well, and how advanced materials is a very big part of the Houston economy as well. Just with all of the refineries and kind of developing various polymers, various plastics, carbon fiber, stuff like that goes into making all of these things, making the physical hardware. You got to have the materials in order to do it. So I know there's a lot of advanced material innovation with people like Honeywell and all sorts of large and small companies here in the region.
I know it's crazy when we think about all the small details. It's so many things to consider when just space tech, like you said, Brent, is super broad, but I think it actually branches out into so many things that actually can be maybe considered out of, or just complementing or supplementing the topic of space tech. So guys, based on your article, I read this. Grand visionaries set the tone. Technology and entrepreneurship paved the way. I love that quote. I loved it. I want you guys to tell me, what does this mean for the people who actually want to work on these startups? Like I'm thinking that right now, speaking about this topic, is a lot of people who get lucky, people who have the fundings to maybe come in to Texas and start kind of like building again the technology to try to launch missions or whatever. So if there's people around there like really wanting to work in this industry, period, what does all of these means to them?
Well, Brent, you wrote that line, so
I love it. It seems like it has been invented. So
yeah, I think a lot of the people who get involved in space technology business, at least the founders themselves, are the types of people who like sort of impossible problems, and like in startup world, we talk a lot about like being, and in life in general, like be okay with failing and fail fast. And to me, these are the folks who live it. Like they blow things up on the regular. They are gonna, like they're on the edge of bankruptcy. Most of these companies are on the edge of bankruptcy all the time, including SpaceX. Even with the millions and billions of dollars, these are people who are just like running the impossible race and believing they're going to finish, even though we know that probably they're going to be part of a lineage, just as the people before them. And it's, like, we're never going to like exhaust this. So, these people are real problem solvers, and you have to have sort of an endless thirst, I think, to get involved in it from a founder perspective.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I would say that what it means, kind of what the message of the article kind of boiled down to, generally I would say, is there are opportunities for young people in Texas to be able to work for companies doing really innovative things, going to space, like sending people into space, like a company in Houston called Axiom Space, who was another kind of potential target who I was going to speak with for the article, but ended up actually doing my interview with Intuitive Machines. Axiom Space will be next year the first private company to launch like private citizens to the International Space Station. They are developing a private module to attach to the International Space Station so they can keep going back and back. And they are building that module in Houston. So there are opportunities for people to get involved in this space, and I would say kind of an interesting space that I didn't talk about in the article as relates to Houston is kind of the healthcare, studying the impacts of human space flight on the body. If there are people that are interested in the technology and biotechnology, that is another area where Baylor College of Medicine here in Houston at the Texas Medical Center is working on. Like they were working with, I believe it was called the Inspiration 4 launch recently, where they were essentially they're going to be tracking the impacts of human spaceflight on the body. There's all sorts of organizations that are working on that kind of stuff. I know of a few in Houston. I'm sure there are others as well. So it's not just physical technology, and it's not just the rockets that send us up there. It's all the other support that goes into it, and the actual, if we're going to keep doing this forever, if we're going to go to Mars eventually, we've got to learn more about the impacts to the body. And so some very smart biotech and pharmaceutical and medicine people are working on that here as well.
This is so interesting.
I mean, for me, I think back to, you can listen to a lot of these interviews with people like Elon Musk and stuff and hear them talk about how science fiction and stuff kind of inspired them to create the kinds of things that they are. So I think a lot of it, it has to do with that kind of inspiration and then drive, even past failure and more failure, and sometimes even more failure after that. One of the companies I wrote about, Axiom Aerospace, that was actually founded by a different person, and the guy who's now the CEO of it was working alongside of them in the research lab and didn't want to see the research that they had done go to waste. So he kind of picked that up and turned it into a different company. But I also think, with the grand visionaries and setting the tone and all that, like Chris was saying, the technologies that are being developed open up new possibilities in areas that, probably somebody hasn't even thought of. So there's opportunities in that. And, I think about a company, I didn't write about it in this article, but it's a startup. They're making like ready-made rocket launch kits for school like programs and stuff like that. So I just think, the inspiration that kind of comes out of these things and the other thoughts that other people have, who knows who will be inspired to, create the next great space technology just because they had the opportunity to launch a rocket in the field when they were in middle school,
That is so true and so interesting. And I love that answer. That's exactly like what all this topic is opening is so many other possibilities, right? I'm actually going to add a question of one of our viewers. Her name is Desiree Crossword. She says, there's a lot of hype surrounding space exploration. What are some of the concerns that our panelists have regarding this exploration and or space technology? Who wants to go first?
I can jump on that. Thanks for the question, Desiree. I guess the very first thing that comes to mind is what is commonly referred to as space junk. We get too much stuff up in lower Earth orbit mostly, but up to and including where the space station is at, which is a little bit further out than most of the satellites that we normally think about. But it's getting crowded up there, even though it's a endless area, so to speak, and there's just growing competition for it and a growing possibility that we screw it up. And the problem with space is it is an international thing, right? So no one person or organization is really entirely in charge of it. So I guess, that's one thing that comes to mind for me. And the other thing that comes to mind is you can't help but think about problems here on Earth that we aren't even close to solving that seem a lot more important than sending up more satellites or going to the moon and putting a structure there or going to Mars. We certainly have a long ways to go here on Earth in every community we live in, including Austin, Houston, and Dallas. And it's hard not to think about, how we invest that money and what's this really building toward, because there's no question this is a business venture for most of the money involved. There aren't a lot of people just throwing money at it like it's a donation. They're looking at the business aspect of this, and that's a large part of what we focused on in the article. But you have to ask yourself, is this the right way we should spend these amounts of money? And if we need to get off the planet, I don't think anybody will ever question it. But if we don't reach that point, it can be hard to stomach it. So I guess those are the two things that come to my mind, is like, yeah, this is a lot of fun, and there's so many cool things about it. But is it the right way to do it?
And before we move on to Chris and Kevin to answer this same question, you actually answer one of my questions that I was going to ask later. It actually really concerned me that you guys mentioned in the article the space junk, but nobody really dipped in the conversation. And this is something that is very personal to me because I have previously mentioned that my son is actually graduating from aerospace engineering, and his research throughout his time in college was about space junk, and they created like a whole project, and he explained a lot about that to us, and I find it so interesting. And actually, just as a regular citizen who really doesn't know anything about space and missions and all that, if you ask me, Patty, what is your concern about people about commercial space travel, period, I would respond, I'm so concerned about how they're going to leave space. Like, there's going to be so much junk there and so much residue and debris and everything. So what are we going to do about that? Who's taking care of those things right now, right? So I would like to deepen more into that topic because it's something that actually, as a regular human being, that concerns me a lot. But I don't know if can we please go to Kevin and Chris to answer that question first?
Yeah, I mean, I second what Brent said. I was literally going to say those two things, but I think to add on to that, like you said, it is a business venture, and it does require, in a lot of these cases, a lot of money to get going. And if space is kind of the future of where things are going and where they're headed, I do wonder if there should be a concern about, does that kind of act as a gatekeeper to keep everybody else out? And so if it is kind of the future of things are, how do we make sure that it remains accessible to, everyone, or entrepreneurs that want to get involved, or even just everyday people?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kevin and Brent, I was also going to mention, fundraising remains a barrier, right, as it does for lots of different startups across industries. But particularly in the case of trying to make a spaceborne asset or something like that, you're going to need a lot of capital in order to do that. So, we can talk ad nauseum about the problems in connecting entrepreneurs, early stage entrepreneurs, to venture capital, right? And Austin is in a much better position than a place like Houston. I know all sorts of Houston entrepreneurs and companies that go up to Austin because of its robust venture capital environment. And luckily it's growing in that space, right? Because Texas is kind of benefiting from some of the exodus that we've seen from the coasts, from the West Coast, from the East Coast. We have seen venture capitalists come into Austin, if not moving there themselves, and then at least opening an office or maybe hiring some folks there. Certainly evaluating deals. And Brent, I believe, wrote a story just a couple of weeks back about Live Oak Ventures, which has raised a new fund. Live Oak Venture Partners, I believe, that to invest across the state of Texas. So, it's a big challenge to be able to raise that kind of money. But there are more opportunities if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to get into the space, to be able to go find, the capital that you need. It's a challenge, but it's getting better. And then Patty, I would have, it was a good segue, because I was also thinking, like, what is going to be the future in space junk, and who is protecting us from that? And I guess, depending on what you think of the Space Force, whether or not that was like a necessary government initiative to spin the Space Force out of the Air Force, like, essentially that's one of the missions that they are tasked with, is securing our space assets. And like I said earlier, I'm sitting here in San Antonio. If anything that San Antonio excels in, it is cybersecurity and its defense contracting, being military city USA, really. So there are a lot of other applications that we're not really even discussing here when it comes to defense, when it comes to like working with the U.S. military and the Space Force. I mean, San Antonio was among the people that could have gotten the Space Force headquarters, but I believe it went to Huntsville, Alabama. So, there are a lot of opportunities in that space. Cybersecurity will be one of the most growing industries and employment sectors in the United States in the coming years. And a lot of people are leaning into that. I know here in San Antonio with the University of Texas, San Antonio. So, that is another ancillary space where in this space economy, you're going to need a lot of cybersecurity to be able to secure our space assets.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go into the another question, because I have a long list, guys, I'm so excited about learning so much. Did any of the CEOs and people that you were interviewing mention anything like more in depth about space junk?
I'm trying to think.
Because I read your article like 4 times and I did see the subtitle, but I didn't see like anyone. I think it was before Steve Altimus, I think, was starting to talk about what I can't remember the topic exactly, but
Steve, sorry.
nobody really said anything about something that's been done. Sorry, Chris.
No. Sorry to interrupt you.
Hmm.
I was going to say, it's kind of funny because, a lot of these companies are in the business of putting more junk, so to speak, in space, right?
Exactly.
And I don't want to call it junk because it's expensive technology and it serves a purpose to do all of this. But, we are rapidly, probably, I don't want to, I can't speak with authority on this, but I would imagine the number of assets that are deployed into orbit every single year is increasing. I don't know if that's exponentially, but is certainly going up. I'm blanking on exactly who was involved the other day. Was it Russia or China with destroying one of their assets that caused problems in space? Even for the people aboard the ISS having to shelter because things falling out of orbit or moving in space, they keep going and they can run into other things. So yeah, I mean, at least in the case of Intuitive Machines, like Intuitive Machines is deploying satellite arrays and like communications and networking infrastructure to be able to have like communicate on the moon eventually and relay that back to Earth, in a more secure and timely fashion. So space junk is only increasing from here. I think that's an opportunity, right? Like, who is going to be the person that solves that? It's one of you listening right now could have an idea that could solve in that space.
That's beautiful. Actually, Chris, in your I have the article open right in front of me on my other screen, and I remember reading that I don't know if it's Exos that is actually planning to launch thousands of satellites, right? It says like North Texas sending thousands of satellite into orbit. That's when it actually caught my attention. Like, who's actually talking about what's gonna be left out there? Like, it's gonna be a lot.
Yeah. When I spoke to him, it obviously came up that was an issue, but yeah, it's they're a business, and that's not necessarily the focus of their business. Not that he said it that way by any means, but it was more of a yes, it's a concern, but there are other companies that are working on it. I didn't speak to any companies that were working on that issue specifically, though. But it was definitely something that everyone I talked to brought up as something that's going to be an issue as more and more things get launched into space.
Yeah,
that's good to hear.
Along those lines, Slingshot Aerospace has developed a communication platform for various entities to communicate about their assets in space. So this has a lot to do with complicated telemetry that I don't know anything about. But nonetheless, they've developed this communication system so that folks can have a kind of an open platform in their communities to discuss what's going up where and where it's headed.
Right. And I'll jump in, if anything, right, like the international community, space is supposed to be like that haven, right, where we forget about kind of the other problems that we have down here on Earth and we work together. So there is a lot of that, I would imagine, the sort of collaboration and we're putting something up here, letting people know, being transparent with that. And I think there's organizations that track like all of the space assets and then are pretty transparent with what's up there because it's for the greater good. So it's certainly a problem. It'll become more of a problem, but luckily space is a pretty large place. It's not filled up yet.
Agree. And we have talked about concerns that we have, like things that may happen in space and who's worrying about cleaning the mess and all that, right? I want to ask you guys also, Texas is considered a great hub for rocket testing, but should Texans be happy about this potential, or should they be concerned about unanticipated consequences?
I mean, I think I read something before that there were some issues, with the local town, I think down near Brownsville, where the company was buying up a lot of the properties and stuff like that. And obviously that has an effect on the local community. I mean, there's also, I'm sure, some environmental concerns that would go along with, having some rocket launching going on next door to you. But yeah, I mean, those are the things that kind of immediately come to mind.
Because one of you wrote, there's little risk in causing like damages to environment, something like that. And when I read like little risk, I'm like, what do you mean by that? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like Kevin mentioned in Boca Chica, which I happened to go there, pre-SpaceX. It's a beautiful place. You can skip a rock from the States into Mexico. Chat with the fishermen on the other side of the river. It's a beautiful beach and a nice asset, and that's where SpaceX wants to create. I forget the name of the town, but they basically want to make it their town, and so there's certainly some some very valid concerns about how open this natural resource should remain to all of us who want to visit, or especially if you live there. So there's that, and there's certainly always going to be some real environmental risk whenever you put that much rocket fuel out there. These rockets are designed to be able to explode in a relatively safe way, so they're not just going to go straight into the ocean with however many gallons of rocket fuel they've got. But I think some of the concerns with launching don't strike me as that risky, just because of what's been demonstrated and their ability to control things. And they terminate launches when they get just a few degrees off. So that part of it doesn't bother me, I guess. But certainly the access to land and having these things in typically pretty beautiful places, Florida, California, the Texas coast. I mean, these are real estate developers would probably be happy to grab most of the land that is currently being used to launch. So.
Yes. Yeah, of course. Visionary ones.
Yeah, certainly the environmental concerns are real, right? And I won't, comment more like that we should be able to use Texas's natural splendor. All of us should be able to tap into that. Beyond that, I mean, rocket fuel is a hydrocarbon-based fuel that is contributing to climate change, and it's a hard-to-abate sector. I can't imagine anytime soon we're going to try to electrify launching assets into space. I mean, talking at the CERAWeek Oil and Gas Conference earlier this year, talking about how even aviation is one of our hardest to abate sectors. Are we going to put people into a plane using biofuel? How long is it going to take before we can do something like that? So just the hard to abate nature of rocket launching from an oil and gas and rocket fuel standpoint, we're always going to be causing some environmental problems in that area. Looking at Houston as well, kind of the leader of exporting chemicals and oil and gas, and some of the largest refineries in the country located literally in people's backyards here. And beyond that, I would say that also, there are concerns, right? Like you could have a rocket fall on your house. You could have something explode and it causes debris to fall and then hurt somebody, right? These are chances. But I would say like we are benefiting, from the fact that Texas is so large, and so there's so many different rural parts that I believe out near Van Horn in West Texas. That's where the Blue Origin facility is located. So, I mean, just a lot of room out there to be able to make mistakes, so to speak. Obviously, Boca Chica is a pretty rural place down there and next to the coast, so that you can, obviously launch over the coast. That's an important part in all of that. And, from a testing perspective, you can find places in Texas where there's not going to be another soul. So that, I would say, do we want them to go do it someplace else, or do we want to have that here and benefiting Texas and creating Texas jobs as opposed to going to California or going to Florida, right? It's kind of the trade-off there, and I guess you have to evaluate that.
I mean, we want to have them here, but we don't want them contaminating our beaches because,
I agree.
Guys, I have another question, and I think we're running out of time. And actually, I have another 2 questions from Desiree as well, but I'm going to leave those for the end because they're really cool. So right now, I need to ask you about this. I know you had a conversation with Tom Markusik, founder of and CEO of Firefly Aerospace, about data distribution. This is so interesting to me. So I want us to talk a little bit about that. Do you guys have like just more information about the significance of space exploration and data distribution? Because I do know that is one of the main goals that these companies may have, like to do the whole space exploration, etc.
Yeah, I mean, most of what I used in the story from Tom Markusik was actually from a conversation like this, just like this, that I was sitting in on in the audience. And and I think I quoted it high up in the story. Certainly he's fascinated with the exploration side of it, but I think it's clear he's more focused on the business side of it, and has to be at this point, because in many respects, until you have so much, until you've proven your ability to do this, and you're not just running off of venture capital, you're actually making money by sending things into space, it's hard to think about the next steps, right? But on the other hand, they find methods, usually through NASA, to do things that are on what most of us would think of as space exploration, like lunar landers, which Firefly is working on. So is there much more to be learned from the moon? It's hard to say, but is that a really valuable place for us to potentially be able to station things at for future exploration further out? Probably. So I think in what almost all of these companies are involved with a pretty focused business plan to make money for communications, for things like this. But while doing that, they develop technologies and may discover things that do have a big, profound impact on our understanding of how things work in space and what our capabilities in the future might be.
Yeah. I'm going to change the question because I want to cover some other questions, unless you guys have something to add.
No, I think Brent covered that pretty well.
So, Kevin, I want to ask you something. What do you think about Mars housing? Is it possible that we have gone too far?
I mean, I think like we kind of talked about with one of the other questions, I think there is some of the headlines about that take away from the focus on, the fact that we still need to house people here in Dallas and every city that we have. But I mean, I definitely think it's going to happen. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't. Wow. But, I guess in my head, I think of all the, old sci-fis and Twilight Zone episodes that I saw, thinking about, like what happens to people when they're isolated for that long a time. So I hope they do a lot of testing down there with their icon thing down in Houston. No, I mean, I think it'll definitely happen. My concern would just be that, it costs millions and billions of dollars to do these things. And that's money that could solve a lot of problems that we have here.
True. I agree. Do you guys have anything to add?
I would, I think maybe it is possible that we have gone too far, just because we need to get to Mars first, right? Like getting there in itself is going to be a challenge, and that's, I wonder, will we ever see the day, like within my lifetime, to be able to see somebody set foot on Mars? I don't know. That is a pretty far off, and there's going to be decades of exploring, and between sending, just the first people to orbit. I mean, it's going to be a while before I think we establish housing there. I mean, I think more in the near term. I think realistically we could see, permanent assets or installations on the moon at some point. I know that is a focus going forward, to be able to have, to build space stations in space or spaceships in space to be then go out even further, literally like the Star Trek series, building the Enterprise and launching it from space. So I think that could be a real possibility, like housing on the moon, or like some sort of permanent base there that we launch people to, or relay them from the International Space Station. Like, I think that could happen in more of a near term than the Mars factor. But if you're looking for a good sci-fi series to watch, watch The Expanse. Talks a lot about like a community on Mars and what that.
That's so interesting to learn.
It's on Amazon, I think.
Okay, that's good to know. I think that, yeah, we're curious enough to try to do that, to take people to Mars. And like you said, people have astronauts going to the moon. That's achieved. Now the next stop is Mars. I'm wondering what's next. That's when I'm thinking, like, maybe we are going way too far. Like, what's next, honestly? I just learned that actually NASA is planning to put a nuclear plant or reactor. Actually, my next question. It says, NASA plans to put a nuclear reactor on the moon within a decade. What are your thoughts on this? Have you read about this, or am I giving you the breaking news?
It's news to me.
Really? Yeah, it seems. Did you guys know about this, Brent and Kevin?
No,
I've not heard it.
Oh my God, I'm so happy I can share this with you. And I have it right in front of me. So this aims to create a system that sits on the moon's surface and provide the power needed to operate rovers, conduct experiments, and turn the water and other resources into life support for astronauts. So now that you know what this is about, what do you guys think?
I guess my first thought is, have
There's
we
an
mastered
update for the article.
have we mastered these on Earth yet?
Right.
Exactly. That is so true. That is so.
But I mean, it's gonna take something more than just putting just hauling things back and forth to the moon. We will ultimately need a power source. Usually you think of solar as the primary thing, but when you talk about launching rockets and long-term operations, either solar has to get a lot better or you need to find an alternative.
Actually, they said in the article that anything they do with this plant, they want or reactor, they want to do it independent from the sun. That's what I heard. So I don't know where they plan to create the power, but yeah, we'll have to be on the lookout for this to be developed, right? Guys, I'm so mad that I have so many questions that I just couldn't answer, but we're almost over time. And I do have one more question from me and one more from Desiree. You're going to love Desiree's questions. But my last question is there anything that actually, let me add it here. Is there anything that you discovered while working on this article that really surprised you? And I want you guys, all of you, to give me an answer. Can we start with you, Kevin?
I mean, I guess honestly, what kind of surprised me was just the fact that there were so many companies that came up in reporting this article that, I've been covering this beat for 2 years, covering startups and emerging technologies that I had never heard of. So I think that was kind of the surprising thing, is how many companies are working on these technologies that aren't out there grabbing headlines. A lot of them, some of them are supported purely off of like defense contracts and stuff like that. And I think that was really the most surprising thing to me, was just the amount of activity that I found as I continued to look.
That's great.
I would second that. Just the scale that Texas has seen, right? I mean, we think we're leaders in a lot of different areas, and we are, right, in the energy industry and in healthcare and in defense. But it did surprise me, and that we were able to kind of put this together, that there was enough going on out there in all of the markets in Texas, and we've subsequently added a San Antonio Inno market. So hopefully we can loop them in next time around and then talk more about what's going on in South Texas. But the scale of this operation and all of this stuff going across Texas is large and only getting bigger, right? Because like the commercial lunar payload program, various other things that NASA is rolling out to be able to give private companies a shot at doing something. And that plays into doing things cheaper, right? Instead of spending all this, the government spending all this money, like we're allowing private industry to come in and innovate possibly for less amounts and take some of that business. So it's surprising the amount that it's grown, and it's surprising to somebody who was born and raised in Texas to see all of these people coming from all over the country to want to be part of it. So that surprised me.
I agree. Totally agree.
Yeah,
I
would double down on that. And I think the thing that surprised me is just how far down the path a lot of these companies are. most of the companies that I wrote about were formed within the decade, and a lot of them in the past like 5 to 8 years. Since we wrote the article, Firefly Aerospace had their first launch. It went hypersonic. They did terminate it because it went a little bit off, but they consider that a success. As you might remember, most companies and organizations that have gotten a rocket into space blew up a few before they got there. So, just knowing that these companies have grown this much, this fast, soup to nuts, from we want to start this company to we're about to launch a rocket into space, it's a short time span, especially considering the scale of the company and the funding. Obviously, back in the early days, it took basically everything the U.S. government had to get these things going. And now on a smaller scale, these things are moving fast. Cesium Astro, since I wrote about it, has had their communications, sats, and hardware deployed in space, and they're presumably currently working on testing with those. So these things move really fast, and I think that's what surprised me the most is in startup land, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm working on this idea, and it's it's R&D, and it's maybe in 6 years we'll really figure this out. And most of these companies have things that are operational in space or interacting with things that are operational in space. It's not just an idea,
No. So literally the sky is the limit, right?
Yeah, maybe it's not.
Moral of the story.
Guys, I need to wrap up our meeting, and I'm so mad because I really think we need a part 2 and maybe part 3 and 4 and 5 because this is so interesting. I'm loving the conversation, but I do want to wrap up today with 2 fun questions from Desiree. These, I really like them. So the first one is, what is y'all's favorite space movie?
This one's kind of easy for me. I mean, first as a kid, Star Wars, but when we talk about recent movies, the movie Arrival I thought was absolutely fantastic and really sparked my imagination as a twist on the usual sort of Mars attacks and the aliens.
Oh my God, I love that.
So as a concept, I'd recommend Arrival. I thought that was a fantastic film, even if it might feel a little confusing at times.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say Mars Attacks because I think that's one of the greatest comedies ever made. But I think if you're looking for something with a little more intellectual, there's like a Danny Boyle movie that came out around like 2011 or something called Sunshine that was really good. It's about like what happens to a crew, like isolation in space and how that kind of affects them.
That's cool. How about you, Chris?
I just had a movie in mind. Oh yeah, Interstellar. That's got to be one of the better ones in recent times. I guess Gravity was also good. I would say Interstellar was better. Had better music.
Oh my God, Gravity is the best. Yes, I agree.
But then I would also say if any Trekkies out there, or wannabe Trekkies, watch Star Trek. We'll start with Star Trek: The Next Generation, and then quickly move into Star Trek: Deep Space Nine, my favorite of the series. I'll leave it there.
That's a great opinion. So if I could actually give my favorite as well, I would say Enemy Mine. It's a really old movie, but I love it. I'm so romantic about that. And if Back to the Future would apply as like space traveling, then that one is my favorite as well. But maybe maybe it doesn't apply. And the second question that Desiree is asking is, if you guys had the opportunity to travel to space, which you will because, commercial space travel is happening, what would you want to do up there?
I mean, I definitely want to have like probably some happy hour drinks with some aliens. I'm just guessing by the time I get there, we'll have met and it'll be kind of cool. But
you need to learn the language first, Brent.
Yeah, definitely.
But maybe wine is going to help flow,
Yeah, for sure.
How about you, Kevin?
I mean, I guess if we're just going with like craziness, I think it'd be cool to like see what happens when you eventually like go through a black hole or something like that. But realistically, I'm incredibly claustrophobic, so I probably would never actually like want to get on the rocket in the first place.
Me too. Like just the suit. Like forget about the rocket.
I don't know how to do in a tube in space for a few months.
True. And
then,
how about you, Chris?
I certainly, I guess I would go to space. I would be claustrophobic. I would be afraid as well. But I guess, I would take up a lot of physical room on a rocket. So I would have to do something that I was, really needed to be done. So maybe if there was some sort of journalistic purpose for me going up there and documenting.
Oh my God,
that.
of course. Anything you
know.
see, you can bring photos and write something about it, please.
Mhm.
So, Brent, I think you're the one that actually is brave enough to do that. So we'll have to take your word on anything you see. And I wish you personally that you actually fulfill that dream. So, guys, thank you so much. You have no idea how happy I am that I was able to land this interview. I really believe that we have to do a part 2 because I have like 10 questions that I didn't ask. And the article is fascinating. Whenever you guys have like an update or you write anything that is related to the topic, if you want to reach out, I'm more than happy to coordinate another get together because I had a lot of fun. But next time it's going to be happy hour. Okay?
Happy hour with aliens.
Thanks,
Exactly.
thanks so much to you, Patty, and to Austin Urban Technology Movement. I meant to mention earlier, I've written several times about the work you guys do with NI and across the Austin community. I think it is incredibly valuable to the community and is a big part of what we end up writing about. Some of the kids and people who end up becoming the founders of these companies have the ideas and the ambitions to push things to the next level.
Thank you, Brent. Appreciate that. One of my questions was actually about diversity in this industry, and basically because I learned about Melanie Strickland being the CEO of Slingshot Aerospace. That intrigued me so much, but I do want to touch on this in depth. I don't want to be just like rushing into the answer just because it's already been an hour, but I really hope that we can have a part 2 and we can talk about that, because for us, diversity and inclusion in the tech industry is our mission, our priority, and that's what we root for. So, well, thank you so much, guys. Very much.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll talk to you soon. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and stay tuned because I'm gonna convince these guys to do this again.
Have a great
Goodbye.
night. Thanks so much.
Have a good night. Bye.